Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 823. Today we're going to take a look at Warhammer Quest Darkwater. This is a recent release from Games Workshop. I'm recording this in the new year in 2026. This came out a little bit before Christmas last year in 2025. And I've had time to paint it all up, get it played. I played through a full campaign and then a couple other like one-shot scenarios to kind of get familiar with some of that part. So what the game is, it's got the name Warhammer Quest, although it is probably the most different from the other Warhammer Quests. They're usually like traditionally like a dungeon crawl, although some of the modern ones do kind of riff on that. This is not a dungeon crawl, though it kind of feels like it sometimes. And this has a giant book, which I'll show you instead of, tiles that you explore and that kind of thing. And it has kind of an interesting way of going through different scenarios and how it kind of unravels the campaign and all that kind of stuff. And let's just go down to the table and then I will give you kind of my sort of final thoughts on it. And we'll see how it plays and all that, and then I'll come back. So here I've got the table kind of set up as it might look like when you are soloing this game, because that's what I've been doing with this game. So here you've got the book, and I think the camera is not really showing you the size of the book. It's actually quite substantial. But then down here I've got character cards, action cards, equipment, and all that kind of stuff all along the board here, and then some models off to the side and things like that. And you can see there that it takes up a fair bit of room, and mostly because you've got to want to have some cards splayed out, because that's kind of like one of the main mechanisms of the game is getting the reward cards, using and spending those wisely over the course of the whole campaign. And really, when you use those rewards is really kind of a key part of the game. Your actual play space here with the models is always going to be that same size. And I will put up some pictures and stuff of my painted models beyond what you're seeing here, but you can see kind of the detail on one of the maps here, and there's 19 different maps, 19 pages. You can see this one is what, number 11. You can see the number in the corner. Every map will lay flat and it looks good. I mean, you can see the artwork on the map and the designs. There will be little tiles and things sometimes that you will add onto the map, and the sort of mission or scenario that you play here will be driven by a deck of cards. So here's an example of the mission that was on here. So there will be multiple missions that play on the same map, but they will be totally different. New rules, new tokens, new enemies. You can see some of the different icons and stuff like that. Like for example, there on that particular space, that may mean different things. Maybe you deploy heroes there that time, or maybe you deploy the baddies and all that kind of stuff, or maybe there's a special thing to interact with, like some kind of switch that you've got to flip or something. At the top of the map here, you can see we've got these initiative tokens with these different symbols, and that's going to vary based on which heroes you're using, and then you're always going to have those red symbols in between. In this case, there's numbers on those, which are actually meaningless to this scenario that I was just playing, but other scenarios will make use of that, so there'll be some kind of derived mechanic from that. And then over on this side you have a round track there, and that'll be different lengths depending on the map, or sometimes the scenario will change up how that actually works. Usually when that round tracker gets to that red space, as soon as it hits it immediately, the game will be over and the players will lose unless they've achieved whatever the mission goal set out, but not always. Sometimes it will reset back to the beginning, or it will have some other condition or some event that happens out on the field here that players will have to deal with. Now, other than the main map of the board, you've got sort of two other main pieces, and of course the models. But first thing you've got here are different character cards, like so. And you can see a couple of things. You've got the hit point tracker there, you got their move value, their defense value, and then their hit points, which is what that is, and then your attack. Everybody has the exact same attack, I think, except for the range, but it's always usually 2 dice and 3 to hit. Some people have more or less range, and then a special ability. And for some of the heroes, there are 2 of each for the heroes, and then there's only 1 version of them. They always have the same equipment. You always have 1 equipment, which can get upgraded over the course of the game. And then you will have a deck, multiple decks of these reward cards. So you can see I've got some from different acts. So you can see here's an Act 2 reward card, Act 1, and Act 3. The game is played over 3 acts, so you'll have up to 4 cards that you can have in front of your character over the course of the game. And then you also have here, these are kind of their main action cards. So every character has the exact same cards. And the way that the characters work is you will tap this, and then it will generate an action point. So if I tap this, I can generate an action point. Now I could either tap it, generate the point, and do the card itself. So I could tap this move to spend and do a move, or I could tap another card. Let's say that there's nobody to aid. I tap that, then I can do a move. Then I can tap the move again and do a second move. Or move as a special thing where if you tap them both, you always move 6. Because typically, unlike this version of Drolf here, who only moves 3, typically the movement is a roll move. It's a d6. But you can always spend 2 action points, you can see it says here, to do a sprint and just guarantee a 6, which sometimes you'll want to do. And then, but if you've tapped it, so if on the first action of my turn I tap the move to move, this is now tapped, I can no longer move. So once you tap that, it's moved. So that's why the aid is kind of like a nice extra action point that floats around to maybe do 2 attacks or 2 moves, or spend with a move to do a sprint and so on. So that's kind of the main part. You'll have other actions here. Maybe these will be action point driven, like this symbol here means you discard it, so it's out of the game permanently. You'll have some, like your equipments, for example, that you'll tap. They'll untap at the end of the round, just like your action cards. You may have some that will flip, like this one. Got this arrow, you'll flip it, and then that is done for the rest of the scenario, for the rest of the encounter, but it will flip back up for your next one, whereas a discard is gone for good. And so also the encounters themselves, which is a nice segue, will have little action point things that you can do specific to them. Now, the game has 2 modes. Let's just pick it back up here. You have sort of a skirmish mode and then a campaign mode. A skirmish mode is you will basically randomly draw an encounter card. So see, this is an encounter for Act 3. And so they go up in difficulty. Like I said, there's 3 acts, 1, 2, and 3. If you do an Act 1, it'll be a little bit easier. Act 3 will be kind of like hard mode, so to speak. And then based on that, you will draw up a certain number of reward cards based on if you chose Act 1, 2, or 3. And then you play through it, and there's a way to actually score points, which is kind of interesting, but you can sort of gauge how well you did on that particular skirmish thing. And then, you can just play a one-off pretty easily if you want to do that. Now, kind of the main way to play the game, and this comes in to play when we look at these boxes. So the game comes with these tuck boxes. You just have to build, just fold and build. So you can see I've got scenario cards here for Act 1, 2, and 3. I've got these decks here, and these are where the rewards cards come in for Act 1, 2, and 3. Now each of these has a divider, because as you go through it, let's say we're going through Act 1 here, and you maybe get and lose and spend cards. This deck will never reshuffle. I don't know that you would ever actually get through the deck, but if you're going to pack it away to save, you've got a deck list here. You could then say, oh, okay, these are the ones we've discarded so far. I'm going to split that deck list in between. So when we go to play tomorrow or next week, we can pull this out. We know we don't look at these because we've already looked at them, and then we can keep playing from here. And it works that way for the scenario cards and the encounter cards and all that stuff here. Same kind of way. There's a divider card that helps you keep track of where you're at. And then there's also 4 kind of generic boxes for the heroes, so you can put in their rewards cards and their equipment, actually keep track of where they are on terms of the hit points. So if you end of the day and Drolf has 6 hit points, he starts with 6 hit points. You don't reset back to 10 every scenario. So you have boxes here for the different characters, and there's some extra like bonus boxes. So these end up just being where you kind of generically keep cards, like you put the boss cards and the NPC cards for their special abilities in there. And then also another little box here for some elite rewards, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the game also comes with a whole bunch of tokens and stuff. And one thing I like about it, I just wanted to point out, it comes with a lot of generic tokens that you can just kind of use for whatever, whether it's marking stuff on the game board, on your character, and so on. And that's kind of a nice thing. Instead of worrying about fussing about making different tokens for whatever, it doesn't really matter, because you're just tracking a certain thing for a little while. You're going to finish this scenario, move on. Then the token can mean something entirely different than the next one. Now, the way that you go through the campaign is, like I said, you play through the 3 acts. So let's take the Act 1 cards out. So we'll take these out of here. Now you can see here, this has a few types of cards in it. What you're going to do is you're going to take, here's the list of cards actually, and this is used as a divider. So you're going to take the 3 boss cards. Each act has 3 boss cards. Shuffle these up, put one at the bottom of your deck. So you start there, okay. Then you're gonna take all the rest of these, and you take about half. You take 14 of these cards. So there's 14 of these, even in your first playthrough, you're not even gonna see, you're not even gonna look at. Then you take the rest of these, shuffle these up, put them on top of the boss card, and then every sort of turn or round through the campaign, you're gonna draw the top 2. You're gonna look and read kind of the flavor text on the front, and then you're gonna choose. And you've got different types of cards. You've got 3 types of cards you can have. Here we can see we have 2 encounters. Let's say we chose this one, we'll flip it over. It'll tell us which page to turn to on the big book out here, and then, you know, give us the rules for that scenario. Now the other 2 types of cards, let's see if we got any, are, here we go, is an event. So you maybe have choice between an event and something else, and so you just do what it says, which will maybe just be a little brief narrative type of thing. Maybe it affects the next encounter that you're going to do, maybe positively or negatively. Or you can have a respite, and there's 3 of these in each deck. So you could go through a whole act not seeing any respites. You could see all 3 as a possibility. These, as they sound, are all the same. You will heal each hero 3, except for the leader. The leader can then pick to heal 3, or they can draw an extra reward, and then players have the opportunity to swap rewards at that point, because you cannot trade rewards at all unless you're in this point, which I'll talk about in the review. So you're going to go through all of that, and then you're going to get to the end, and then let's say that's the boss card. Flip this over. This will give you another thing to do, and this will be the boss fight. And then after each encounter, including the boss encounter, you're going to heal each of your characters D3 wounds. So even if you're down to like 3 wounds at the end of an encounter or a boss fight, and you roll poorly, you maybe just heal 1 wound. So that's kind of where the difficulty in the game may lie. We'll talk about that more in the review. And then after an encounter or a boss encounter, you'll pull cards out of the deck appropriately to that act. And then of course, when you move into Act 2 and 3, the rewards will get better. And then you play all the way through the campaign. You'll fight the big bad at the end. And then you'll kind of like unlock the full game. So I'm not going to spoil it right here in the walkthrough. It's not really a spoiler, but I will sort of preface it going into the beginning of my review, just to kind of talk, because it's just how the game works. I'm not going to talk about anything sort of narratively or anything like that. I'm not going to spoil that, because there is some really kind of funny and cool stuff that happens that way. But that's basically what you do. You play through either a campaign game, which could take you, I wasn't keeping a stopwatch, I played through 1 full campaign. I think the box is like 10 to 15 hours, something like that. And I could see that, because depending on how many encounters you go through in a deck, because an encounter probably takes, I don't know, half hour or so, they're not too long, you know, but if you went through like 3 of them, I mean, that's an hour and a half right there. So maybe that's all the time people have. But again, the boxes make it easy to save things off and come back to it another day. But it doesn't take too long, and you can kind of steer it as you get the choices off the deck. There may be a tendency to say, oh, let's avoid the encounters, which I'll just say right now you shouldn't necessarily do. We'll talk about that in the review. But that's generally how the game kind of works itself out. Okay, so that was a brief overview of Warhammer Quest Darkwater. I'll go into my 3 pillars. First thing I'll talk about is player count. I've only soloed it, like I mentioned in the walkthrough. I do have a group where we play lots of different campaign games and things like that. They're very interested to try it. And I think on the surface, I think it'll work well. One of the reasons I showed you kind of my table layout to start the walkthrough part of it is that it is overwhelming at first to solo it, because you've got the 4 characters, 4 different abilities, 4 different equipment, and then you start adding all of the cards and all those abilities, trying to keep in your head what's going on, because the game is very puzzly, so you do want to use equipment at the right time, don't just waste it, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a little overwhelming solo, but after a while, like I said, I played through a whole campaign, you do kind of, at least I was able to, you know, digest everything and kind of get used to it and take my time. You know, I'm not rushing myself to play it. So I played the campaign probably over the course of about a week, give or take. And yeah, so it's soloable for sure, but I am looking forward to playing it with others, and we'll talk about that why in a minute. And the play time, like I said during the walkthrough, it says like 10 to 15 hours for a campaign. I think that's right. Like I said, I was sort of stretching it out over a week. you know, I did say during the walkthrough about each sort of encounter where you're on the map, that's about a half an hour or so, maybe 45 minutes. They're not very long. I never had one go over an hour, that's for sure. And then, you know, the other cards are just like, you know, read it, do what it says. It takes like a minute, you know. So it's pretty snappy, and it's pretty light in that way. Now, let's get to the meat of it, you know, the third pillar of review. Well, like, what is this game like? Well, I'm just going to compare it to other Warhammer quests, because they put the name on it, and I can see why they did that, and I'm not upset. I'll be honest with you, when I first saw it, and then I first saw the pictures of the book and stuff, I was like, this is not a Warhammer quest game. There's no dungeon explorer, yep. But I started to see Ash Barker, Guerrilla Miniatures, cover it, and I was like, oh, okay, this looks pretty good. Or it looks like it could be good, at least. And, you know, nothing particularly from what he was saying about it, because I was watching kind of his early impressions, but it just, he did some Let's Plays, and I was like, oh, I kind of think I see what they're going for. And I think Ash even mentioned this in passing as well. And I heard another reviewer say something kind of similar, so I was like, okay, I got to check this out. So what this to me is a kind of like Games Workshop addressing Kickstarter in a way. Not necessarily, that's not like the end all be all of the game. I actually think it's a little bit more to it than that. Because of what it is, it's a lot of different boss encounters, boss fights, you know, puzzly sort of situations, that kind of stuff. And if you think of the price, which is about 200, you can, in the US here, we can get it for like 220 online to about 250, 260, I think retail. So it's around Kickstarter ballpark for like a big beefy miniature Kickstarter like Oathsworn. And I will probably compare this to Oathsworn more than I should, but it's very Oathsworn-esque, where you have narrative stuff happening. Sorry for this. Narrative stuff happening, and then you have like a you know, skirmish encounter map thing, and you have a little setup stuff there, and all that stuff's going on. So that sort of give and take, that yin and yang balance between like little narrative storytelling back and forth to an encounter, that's very Oathsworn-esque. Now, Oathsworn's a little bit more stark, where it's like an hour plus narrative, lots of puzzles and choices, to an hour and a half, you know, skirmish encounter. Very starkly. But this is a lot of back and forth, because you're going through that deck of cards, very brief narrative things that happen very quickly within a minute or two. And then once you go through one of those or a couple of those, then you're back to the map, and it's a very quick thing, like a half hour, 45 minutes. But it has that sort of feel to it. So it feels to me, not that they set out purposefully or consciously to do this, maybe they did, to say, let's do a Warhammer Quest version of Oathsworn. And by the way, Oathsworn is a very old Warhammer Old World vibe to it as well. So that's why I'm also comparing it to Oathsworn. So that's what's going on here. And I think what's really neat about this is how this works out is, instead of doing a dungeon crawl, instead of doing, you know, what they've kind of done in the past with the whole dice activation system in Silver Tower and Blackstone Fortress and all that stuff, they set out to do something a little bit different. They took a risk. And so far, as Warhammer Quest has gone along, I've enjoyed all of them, except for Cursed City, and then that Lost Relics was like, okay, you know, it was kind of a Barnes & Noble introductory game that maybe you could play, you know, with kids or something, but it wasn't like a terribly made game. Cursed City I didn't like at all. But they kind of took a risk with Cursed City, and frankly, they kind of took a risk with Silver Tower, Hammerhall, and Blackstone Fortress, and I really thought they knocked it out of the park, especially with Blackstone Fortress. This, I think they took another risk, and I also think they knocked it out of the park. Not to say it's a perfect game, but that's what I kind of like what they're doing here, because the interesting part about this is that deck of act cards. When you are presented with that, it's a really cool, simple, but a cool thing. It's like you have two narrative choices, and I found myself, when I was playing through the campaign, migrating from somebody that was like, oh, this is an encounter or an event, counter event, so make your decision there, because it's like, oh, characters have low hit points, or, you know, this and that, or maybe if the event sounds like it might be good, but that could be a trick. But then I started, you know, I was thinking of it mechanically, and like, how am I going to succeed based on my choice. As I went through, and it wasn't very long, I was still in Act 1 when I got to this point, I was starting to string together a narrative in my head based on all the things that had happened previously. And I said, okay, well, what would happen here? You know, oh, we were in here in the swamp and we fought these things. Okay, so now we've stumbled into this lair or something, or somebody's actually been chasing us this whole time. And it was kind of one of those like procedurally generated solo role-playing kind of activities that you can do. You know, a lot of people that do the solo role-playing, they get a book and then they have like a bunch of things and they roll on a chart or whatever and they go, oh, okay, so this happens now. And they have like a couple of choices and they do what kind of narratively makes sense. So I was kind of doing that here, going like, am I going to go left or am I going to go right? And it worked out really well. It was a lot of fun. And to me, that is like the main number one selling point of the game is, in my opinion, being able to go back through that campaign, because you also have, you're only using half the deck of cards. So you take half the cards in the act, and then you're looking at every other one, because you're looking at 2 and choosing 1 and discarding 1. So you would have read it, but I've already forgotten all the ones I didn't actually do. So I'm only looking at a quarter of the cards for each act in the game. And so I can see myself next time playing through and be like, okay, I already did that one. So I'm just going to do this one just because. But I also might just choose one I already did because it fits narratively. And that whole process, which is a very small, it takes up a small portion of your playing time, just that quick choice. But it's really huge. It's really a big part of the game. And I think it's just an awesome thing that they did. Okay, so that's out of the way. So here's where kind of the spoiler-ish thing starts, and I will timestamp this and timestamp it to the end. I'm not going to spoil any narrative stuff, but it's kind of how the campaign works after you finish the first campaign, because it has like unlockables. So anyway, skip to the head if you don't want to know this, but you're going to know it opening the box, in my opinion, okay? You're going to know it putting together the models and be like, oh, well, there's another hero. You know what I mean? It's like in the instructions. So here we go. So you start with 4 characters and then you play through the campaign. And over the course, you will unlock 3 more characters, which you can then play on your next campaign. The rules, as stated, you don't play them in this campaign. So it's not like you unlock them and start using them. It's kind of like you meet them along the way or whatever. They're also here trying to fight Nurgle, and away you go. Now the reason for that is you also unlock 4 new versions, or 1 new version of the other 4. So you've got those new versions. So now you can choose one of those. And then by the end you realize, oh, we didn't actually beat the guy. It tells us now we've unlocked the campaign to go beat him again. So it says, okay, go back and replay the campaign. And then after you finish the campaign again, then you get to play this final fight, which is like a really tough version of him. Which is cool, because that's kind of what happens in like a comic book story or a narrative. It's like you beat the bad guy and he's like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, he escapes and you get to fight him again. And there's enough variety in the act cards when you go play through it again. It's like, oh, well, we'll be fighting him in a different area. And so then you basically play through it again, but now you've unlocked all the versions of the characters, all the new characters, and you have a deck of reward cards, which are act reward cards. So you get your normal reward cards, but then it says in the rules, when you unlock the rewards for the act, those will go in the next time you play the campaign. And you don't put all of them in, you only shuffle in 4 randomly out of the Act 1, 4 out of the Act 2, and out of the Act 3. Those will go in each deck the second or third or whatever time you play it in the future. And those are like really powerful, but there's only 4 in the deck, so you maybe don't even see them, or maybe only see 1 or 2 of them when you play through it again. And there's like some set collection stuff that you can do, but it'd be very hard. You'd have to almost, you know, artificially configure it so that you got them, but there's possible to get like little combos and stuff, you know, that items that work together, like a set collection. Like you think in World of Warcraft where you get like your whole suit and it all combos together and you're just kicking ass. So that's, you play it through the second time with maybe a sprinkle of those reward cards, which help with the difficulty, and then you've got some new characters and stuff to play through. And that's it. So you just basically play the game twice and then you've played the full game. So I've only effectively played the game halfway through, even though, but I've done nothing's really changed. I just don't have those extra reward cards, and I never fought the final guy. I haven't done that yet. So maybe I'll do that with my group. We'll just play through. I was like, hey guys, I unlocked everything. Let's just play a campaign with everything unlocked. But I think that's cool. It's kind of like you're on training wheels a little bit, in that first playthrough of the campaign. You kind of get a feel for how things work and all that stuff. So the other part of it is, so that's all the campaign stuff. The spoiler ends now. But the other part of it is the puzzliness of the scenarios. And there's two parts to this. One is it's really cool. Like, I don't know, most of all of them, the puzzles and the objectives of the encounter were awesome. They were so cool. Whether they were easy or difficult or that kind of thing, like narratively, thematically, they were really cool. I've really liked it. It was just clever little things throughout the whole game. It was really fun. So that is such a cool departure from some of the original Warhammer quests. Silver Tower kind of gets into that a little bit, where it has this weird stuff that you do. And that's what I love. I really like Silver Tower for some of this really wacky, funky, off-the-wall things. So this has some of that. So you've got that. And then you also, talking about now the difficulty of it, that's going to vary greatly. Because the one thing which I will levy as a criticism, or just a note of warning, I guess, is the game is a little bit easy. And it has a kind of a similar problem to Blackstone Fortress, where like once you get a lot of upgrades and stuff, because Blackstone Fortress is very upgrade driven with all the different cards and stuff, then things get easy. So once you have all the upgrades, you can still roll poorly and lose, but if you roll decently and you're smart about how you use your upgrades, things should be relatively straightforward. Now, until you get those upgrades, it might be a little bit more difficult. But also what's going to happen, and this is a thing that I think I may look at down the road, is now that I've kind of gotten the idea of how the puzzles kind of work and sort of the timing, the pacing, that kind of stuff, so I've got a little bit of a mastery of the game. The difficulties also comes into play when you are stretching it over the course of multiple scenarios. Because like I talked about in the walkthrough, you don't just heal back to full at the end of every encounter. You heal D3, which could be 1, which big whoop, or 3 hit points, which maybe also big whoop. The other thing is if you lose an encounter, you have to discard reward cards 4 between all heroes. So you just spread it out and discard to 4. But if you ever lose an encounter and you don't have 4 cards to discard, then you've lost the whole campaign. You have to start over. So the thing about that is some of the reward cards are just really good. They're very useful. Some are more situational, still pretty useful. But there are some situations I found where I was like, oh man, if I did not have this one reward card, I would 100% lose this scenario. And I was like, that's probably okay. Maybe there's another way that I wasn't seeing to beat the scenario because I had this reward card. Maybe there's another avenue I didn't take. But your sort of experience, I think, is going to be driven by the rewards that you're given at the end of the encounters and things like that. Because there are certain rewards that, and I'll just say it here, that decrease the defense of the monsters, because they automatically block like whatever amount of hits. So if they have 2 defense and you roll 2 hits, well, they're blocked. And most heroes roll 2 dice. So unless you get bonuses that let you roll more dice or lower the defense of the monsters, which are huge. And so if you do that at the right time, then you can definitely circumvent some of the obstacles in your way. So if you don't have those rewards, it's going to be more or less difficult. So it's going to vary there. But once you kind of understand that and what to kind of go for, then it's going to be interesting. So the point I'm trying to get to here is the respite cards, because if you could play the game, I think you could try this. If you wanted to make it more difficult, is you could say we are going to make sure we have no respite, and maybe we do a respite at the beginning of each act. So you just in Act 1. There's no respites. You put a respite in the top 2, let's say, of the Act 2 and 3, so you can take that and do that, and then you've got to make it all the way through. That's when things get interesting, and I found that naturally through gameplay without doing that is really kind of the long arc, the long haul of the game. Is like, okay, if I use this now, that is not necessarily a good idea, because I could do it. It's just like it'd be fun to do, but do I really need to do it now? And once that sort of clicked in, then I was kind of off and rolling, where I was like, I need to wait till that encounter towards the back half of the act, or even the boss fight, where I do use this. And so that's kind of the interesting part of that. You got to make things last over a certain amount of time. And the other thing I wanted to comment on here, and I'll kind of leave it with this, is at first when I was playing it, the reward cards not being able to like immediately trade those, I was like, oh, this is kind of dumb. You know, because how come there's no trading? This is stupid. That's one of my pet peeves about dungeon crawls, is like, how come we can't just trade? Like, why are there no rules for trading? You know what I mean? Or that kind of thing. So basic stuff. But there is. It's always on the respite card. And it's going to seem very simple, but to me, this is where it all kind of comes full circle. Because if you think of the time box, the time scope of what's going on here, it's not like the other Warhammer quest. The other Warhammer quest is you go out, well, Silver Tower a little bit, but you go out, you do your little adventure, you come back to town. You go out, you do a little adventure, you come back to town, or you come back to home base, so to speak. This is not like that. There ain't no home base in Darkwater. This is a hectic 2-day experience in the time frame of the characters that are taking place there. So it's like you're moving from event to event to event to event to event to encounter to encounter to encounter to encounter, breathlessly. You know, there's like nothing, you know, they're chasing us. We're in this huge jungle, this forest. It's alive. It's all pestilent and diseased, and it's all trying to kill us. So the pacing of the theme of what's going on is very hectic. So you don't have time to sit there and swap resources and say, here, take this, you know, whatever. So that's when those respites come into play, and you can say like, yo, you got to have this one, because you're going to see some of these character abilities. It's like, oh, that's the guy we send into combat, or this is the one we hold back, and this is the one we try to sneak through the enemy lines. You'll get that. I'm not going to spoil that here. Man, you're like, you really need this, you know, rope, or you need this special staff or whatever. And those respites are those opportunities to do that. So again, taking those out is going to be interesting. So I think people will come at it and they'll play through the first campaign, maybe 2 campaigns, and be settled with it. But then by the end of that, they're gonna be like, it's a little easy. But then I think it's very easy to tweak the easiness and add to the puzzliness. Like I said, either just removing respites or pulling it so there's only one possibly in the deck. You know, just always take 2 out before you shuffle or something, or add one at the beginning of the act, however you want to do it. Since it's all card driven, it's very sort of plug and play that way. And yeah, so the difficulty there is going to come into, if you can't trade your reward items, you'd be like, you got to make use of it. You got to figure out the puzzle of how to make that item useful for this character or that character. And that's really neat. And that's such a cool thing. And sort of looping back to my initial sort of conceit, which is like, hey, this is a Kickstarter game from Games Workshop. I think they really did a cool thing with this. It's a new way of doing the narrative stuff, the new way of kind of doing a campaign. It's got some light unlocking stuff, kind of, you know, a little bit of training wheels. Not really, that's not the right word, but it's just like a little beginner campaign. And you've sort of unlocked the game, you can play through it again. You probably won't see anything that you played through the first time, and away you go. And so it should be easy to add new stuff. Like, you don't even need a new book, because there's 19 maps. You could just have a little deck of cards and make that an expansion. And, you know, maybe it's Games Workshop, so they're going to be like, go buy these 3 boxes of enemies. And then, you know, this pack of cards. And you're like, oh, that's $150. And so anyway, but, you know, it would be easy to expand and do that. And I think it's just a lot of fun. Other than it's like a little bit easy. You know, once you get the hang of it, it's like, yeah, it's kind of easy. But that's an easy fix. That's not even a fix. It's just like, it's an easy sort of tweak, modularity wise. You know, I could talk about combat and stuff and how the enemies activate. That's the other thing. It's all kind of a here nor there. I like how the action taps. All that stuff works. The one thing I do like with the enemy activation is they have this red and black dice and then like a special ability, and like they cycle through those, the way that works. So enemies are always kind of like rushing or moving in one round, and the next round they're kind of doing their big attacks or their special abilities. Like, it just works itself out naturally the way that works. I didn't even talk about that. So that's such a mechanical thing. But to me, I really wanted to sell the point of how the narrative, you know, rolls out, how it's strung along, and how, you know, the reward cards and that whole sort of resource management over the course of, like, you know, 7-8 games per act. It's interesting. You know, it's cool. I've never really seen anything quite like that. So again, for the price of it, you look at it like a Kickstarter game, because it's like there's 49 great minis in here. And so I think part of that is, like, these are all like, I don't know, 9 times out of 10 better than the miniatures you're going to get in a Kickstarter. And, you know, and it's going to be fun to paint. So it's kind of the Kickstarter for the painter, you know what I mean? Because a lot of, I don't know, this is all probably BS, you know, but a lot of people that get Kickstarter don't really paint them. You know what I mean? And I mean, I don't really paint Kickstarters that I get, and I haven't painted in a long time, and I was like, oh, these also look really awesome to paint, so I painted them. Anyway, a lot of people don't care about that. I do. It's fun. These are great models to paint. But gameplay-wise, all that stuff I talked about, I recommend it. So enough yapping. Thanks.